My millionaire son will marry the woman who grows the most beautiful flower of all. Brandon Thompson couldn't believe what he had just heard. His father, businessman Richard Thompson, had just announced in front of dozens of people that he would personally choose his son's future wife through a flower competition. The declaration happened during Sunday lunch at the family mansion, leaving not only Brandon in shock, but also all the single young women present at the event. "Dad, you can't be serious," said Brandon, trying to keep his voice low to avoid further embarrassment. "I'm not a prize to be won." Richard, a 65-year-old man with perfectly combed grey hair and an aristocratic bearing, adjusted his navy blue vest and smiled with the confidence of someone used to having his decisions obeyed without question. "My son, you're over 30 and still haven't brought a decent candidate to meet the family. If you can't choose for yourself, I'll choose for you. And my decision is final." Emily Parker, 28 years old, was among the young women present and felt her heart race at the announcement. She had worked as a florist in her family's small shop for over 10 years and had known Brandon since their teenage years, when he used to visit the neighborhood to play soccer with friends. What no one knew was that Emily had harbored feelings for him for nearly 15 years, but always considered herself unworthy of someone of his social standing. Beside her, Victoria Prescott whispered excitedly with her friends. The daughter of a prosperous local merchant, Victoria had always made it clear she intended to marry someone who could maintain her high standard of living. And Brandon Thompson was exactly the kind of man she had planned to win over. "This is my chance," Victoria murmured to Rachel Williams, her best friend. "My father has connections with the best gardeners in the region. I'll get the most spectacular flower that's ever existed." Rachel, a 30-year-old art teacher, shook her head in disapproval. "Victoria, this isn't a gardening competition. It's a person's life. Brandon looks just as uncomfortable as we are." On the other side of the garden where the lunch was taking place, Olivia Bennett watched the commotion with growing interest. At 32, she owned a small landscaping business inherited from her grandmother, and her specialty was unique and complex floral arrangements. Olivia didn't know Brandon personally, but his father's proposal sparked a professional curiosity in her, mixed with a strange attraction to the challenge. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like, and especially, subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. Emily remained silent throughout the entire lunch, observing the reactions of the other women. She knew this social dynamic well. The wealthiest families in town always gathered on Sundays at the Thompsons' house, and she was only there because her mother, Mrs. Grace, had provided sewing services to the family for over 20 years. It was one of the rare occasions when Emily had the chance to see Brandon, even if from a distance. Richard continued explaining his rules with the ease of someone organizing a corporate event. The competition will take place in 3 stages over the next 2 months. First stage, each candidate must present a flower she has grown herself. Second stage, a floral arrangement that represents her personality. Third stage, a miniature garden symbolizing how she envisions the future of the Thompson family. Brandon ran a hand through his brown hair, a gesture Emily recognized from their youth as a sign he was extremely nervous or upset. "And what if I refuse to participate in this?" "Of this madness?" asked Brandon, trying to keep his tone respectful despite his obvious indignation. "Then you can say goodbye to your share in the company and find a way to support yourself," Richard replied, without hesitation. "You're 32, Brandon. I can't wait forever for you to decide your future. If you can't choose a wife, I'll choose for you. If you can't manage your personal life, how will you manage our business?" The ultimatum echoed through the garden, like thunder. Everyone present fell silent, understanding the gravity of the situation. Richard Thompson wasn't known for making empty threats, and his construction materials import company was one of the largest in the region, directly employing over 200 people and indirectly influencing the entire town's economy. Emily felt a tightness in her chest as she saw the despair on Brandon's face. She knew him well enough to understand he could never walk away from the family business, not for the money, but because he genuinely loved the work and cared about all the employees who relied on the company's stability. Victoria, on the other hand, could barely contain her excitement. She was already mentally planning how to secure the best flowers and professionals to help her win the competition. To her, the situation was perfect, a direct path to the marriage she'd always wanted, without the awkwardness and uncertainty of a traditional courtship. Olivia continued watching everything with a thoughtful expression. She wasn't particularly interested in Brandon. She barely knew him. But the idea of showcasing her professional skills in such an unusual competition sparked her competitive spirit. Besides, she had to admit the Thompson family could become an important source of clients for her business. Rachel, the art teacher, was torn between indignation at the awkward situation and genuine curiosity about how such a strange competition would unfold. She had some knowledge of botany and always maintained a small but well-tended garden at home, so technically she could participate. But the idea of competing for a husband felt deeply old-fashioned to her. When lunch ended, Richard announced that interested women had until the end of the week to formally register for the competition. He provided a detailed list of rules and judging criteria, proving he'd thought through every aspect of the proposal. Emily walked to the exit beside her mother, who had stayed in the kitchen the entire time, helping with the service. Mrs. Grace was a 55-year-old widow, having raised Emily alone with great effort and dedication after her husband's passing 5 years prior. "You were very quiet today, dear," Mrs. Grace remarked as they walked down the sidewalk toward the bus stop. "Wasn't all that business just too strange?" "It was very strange, Mom," Emily replied, still processing everything she'd witnessed. "I can't believe Mr. Richard actually intends to choose a wife for Brandon this way." Mrs. Grace knew her daughter well and sensed there was more behind her concern. "Emily, you like Brandon, don't you?" The question caught Emily completely off guard. She stopped walking and looked at her mother in surprise. "Mom, where did you get that idea?" "Sweetheart, I've known you for 28 years. Every time we go to the Thompsons' house, you watch that boy with a different look in your eyes. And today, when his father made that announcement, you were more nervous than all the other girls combined." Emily felt her cheeks burn. She had never admitted her feelings for Brandon, not even to herself in a fully conscious way, much less to her mother. "Even if it were true, Mom, what difference would it make? I'm a florist, the daughter of a seamstress. He's the heir to one of the biggest companies in town. I don't stand a chance against women like Victoria Prescott." "Emily Parker," Mrs. Grace said in the firm voice she used when she wanted to make something very clear, "you are the smartest, hardest working, and kindest young woman I know. And if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that money can't buy character or true love. If you really care for this young man, don't let other people decide his future without even trying." Her mother's words echoed in Emily's mind all night. She lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling of the small bedroom she shared with her mother in the 2-room apartment they'd lived in since her father passed away. The idea of entering the competition seemed both absurd and tempting. The next morning, Monday, Emily arrived at the family flower shop earlier than usual. The store, called Garden of Hope, operated on the ground floor of the house where she had lived with her parents during her childhood. After losing her father, they had rented out the upstairs and kept only the shop and a small apartment in the back. Emily knew every type of flower they grew there. Since she was little, she had helped her father care for the plants, and he had taught her not just the cultivation techniques, but also the stories and meanings behind each species. She could instinctively tell when a plant needed more water, light, or different nutrients. It was a natural talent she had inherited from her father and honed over the years. As she watered the geranium seedlings, Emily thought about Richard, Thompson's words. He had said he wanted a flower grown by the candidate herself. She was sure she could present something beautiful and well-tended, but she knew her competitors would have far greater resources than she did. Around 10 in the morning, Brandon walked into the flower shop. Emily felt her heart race, as it always did on the rare occasions he visited. He looked exhausted and worried, nothing like the confident young man she usually observed from afar. "Good morning, Emily," he said with a forced smile. "Do you have a moment to talk?" "Of course," she replied, trying to hide her nervousness. "What can I do for you?" Brandon glanced around the shop, admiring the neatly arranged rows of colorful pots and the sweet fragrance filling the air. I wanted to apologize for yesterday's embarrassment. My father, he didn't consult anyone before making that absurd announcement. I know you were all put in a very uncomfortable position. Emily was touched by his consideration, but also noticed the sadness in his eyes. You don't have to apologize, Brandon. It wasn't your fault. Actually, I do, he said, picking up a small white rose and examining it absently. I should have stood my ground more firmly yesterday. I should have made it clear that I won't take part in this charade. But you'll lose your position in the company, Emily pointed out, unable to hide her concern. Brandon sighed deeply. Maybe that's the price I have to pay to keep my dignity. I can't let my father treat my future like some business deal he can manage. Emily felt a sudden urge to be honest. What if one of the candidates actually interests you? What if it's someone you could care for? Brandon looked at her curiously. Emily, are you thinking of entering? The question caught her completely off guard. She felt her face flush and stammered out an incoherent reply. No. I mean, it's a very complicated situation. I'm sorry, Brandon said quickly. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. It's just, well, if you decide to participate, know that you'd be the only candidate I'd have any real interest in. His words struck Emily like lightning. She stood completely frozen, clutching a watering can in her trembling hands. What do you mean? She managed to ask. Emily, we've known each other a long time. I've always admired your dedication to your work, your kindness to everyone, the way you care for this shop with so much love. If I had to choose someone to build something serious with, you'd be one of the first people I'd think of. Emily's heart pounded so hard she was sure he could hear it. Brandon had just confessed exactly what she'd always dreamed of hearing, but under circumstances that made everything incredibly complicated. But, Brandon continued, I can't ask you to be part of something that goes against all my principles. That would be selfish of me. What if I wanted to participate? Emily asked, surprising herself with her own courage. What if I wanted that chance? Brandon looked into her eyes for a long moment. Then I'd be very happy, but also very worried, because I know my father won't make things easy. He has his own ideas about the kind of woman who'd be suitable for the family. At that moment, the doorbell chimed, and Victoria Prescott walked into the shop, accompanied by Rachel. Victoria wore a pale pink dress that complemented her blonde hair and carried a designer bag that probably cost more than Emily made in 3 months. Brandon, Victoria exclaimed with a radiant smile, what a coincidence running into you here. Emily immediately knew there was nothing coincidental about this encounter. Victoria had obviously tracked Brandon down and decided to intercept him. Hello, Victoria, Brandon replied politely but without enthusiasm. I was just telling Rachel about your father's creative proposal, Victoria said, completely ignoring Emily's presence. I think it'll be an interesting experience for all of us. Rachel seemed uncomfortable with her friend's direct approach. Actually, I'm still deciding whether I'll participate, Rachel said. It's a bit unusual. Oh, Rachel, where's your sense of adventure? Victoria laughed. It'll be fun. And Brandon, I'm sure you'll be impressed by what we can all create. Emily watched the exchange, feeling completely invisible. Victoria spoke as if she weren't even standing in her own shop, and Brandon looked increasingly uneasy. Well, I should go, Brandon said abruptly. Emily, thank you for the talk. It was enlightening. After he left, Victoria finally turned to Emily. Darling, I'd like to buy some seedlings to start preparing for the competition. Could you recommend some flowers that are easy to grow and will look beautiful quickly? The irony wasn't lost on Emily. Victoria was asking for help from the very person she intended to defeat. It depends on what you're looking for, Emily replied professionally. What kind of flower do you have in mind? Something impressive. Something that stands out. You know, a flower that shows sophistication and good taste. Emily showed her several options, from orchids to rare roses, explaining the care each required. Victoria bought seeds of the most expensive and complex flowers available, seemingly unconcerned about how difficult they'd be to grow. After the two left, Emily was alone with her thoughts. The conversation with Brandon had changed everything. For the first time, she knew he had genuine feelings for her, but that also made the decision to participate even harder. If she participated and lost, it would be devastating. If she didn't participate, she'd never know what could have happened. During lunch, Emily talked to her mother about the dilemma. "Mom, Brandon came to the shop this morning," she said, hesitantly. "And what did he want?" asked Mrs. Grace, serving beans onto her daughter's plate. He said if I decided to enter the competition, I'd be the only candidate he'd have any real interest in." Mrs. Grace stopped eating and stared at her daughter. "He actually said that?" "He did. But he also said he couldn't ask me to participate in something that goes against his principles." "And how do you feel about it?" Emily played with the food on her plate before answering. "I feel like this is the only chance I'll ever have to find out if there could be something real between us. But I also feel like it's a humiliating situation for everyone involved." "Sweetheart, sometimes life puts us in less than ideal situations that can lead us to places we never imagined. If you truly love this young man, and if he's shown interest in you, maybe it's worth facing the discomfort. But what if I can't compete with women like Victoria? She has far more resources than I do." "Emily, you're forgetting something important. You grew up in this shop. You understand flowers better than anyone else in town. If this competition is really about knowledge and skill with plants, you have a natural advantage." Her mother's words made sense, but Emily knew the competition wouldn't just be about technical knowledge. Brandon's father clearly had expectations about the kind of woman who would be suitable for their family. Expectations that likely included social status and financial means. That Monday afternoon, Emily received an unexpected visitor. Olivia Bennett, the owner of the landscaping company, walked into the shop with a professional and determined air. "Good afternoon," Olivia said. "You're Emily, aren't you? We met briefly yesterday at the Thompsons' house." "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" Olivia looked around the shop with professional interest, examining the plants and the layout. "I wanted to talk to you about the competition. Are you planning to enter?" Emily was surprised by the direct question. "I'm still deciding." "What? About you?" "Yes, I intend to participate," Olivia replied without hesitation. "Not necessarily because I'm interested in Brandon, but because I see it as a valuable business opportunity. The Thompson family has connections that could be very useful for my company." Olivia's honesty was refreshing after Victoria's theatrics. "That's a practical approach," Emily noted. "Exactly, and that's why I wanted to talk to you. I know you have exceptional knowledge about flowers, and I have experience in design and presentation. We could form a partnership." "What kind of partnership?" "We both enter the competition but share knowledge and resources. No matter who wins, we both benefit. If I win, I'll hire you as a permanent consultant for my company. If you win, I'll help you expand this shop." The offer was tempting, but Emily hesitated. Wouldn't that be cheating? "No more than Victoria Prescott hiring professional gardeners to do the work for her," Olivia replied pragmatically. "And believe me, she's already started doing exactly that." "How do you know?" "Because she approached me last night, offering a considerable sum to drop out and help her instead. I obviously refused, but it gave me a clear idea of the kind of person we're dealing with." The news about Victoria didn't surprise Emily, but it confirmed her suspicions about the girl's character. "I need to think about your proposal," Emily said. "Of course, but don't take too long. The registration ends on Friday, and if we're going to do this, we need to start planning." After Olivia left, Emily became even more confused. The landscaper's proposal made sense professionally, but it seemed to make the whole situation even more artificial and calculated. On Tuesday morning, Emily decided to visit Mrs. Rose, a 70-year-old woman who had been a close friend of her father and who maintained one of the most beautiful gardens in the city at her modest home on the outskirts. If there was anyone who could give advice about flowers and life, it was Mrs. Rose. Mrs. Rose's house was 3 blocks from the flower shop, in a residential neighborhood where the homes were small, but the gardens made up for it with lushness and color. The front garden was a symphony of colors and fragrances, with roses, hibiscus, jasmine, and dozens of other species blending in perfect harmony. "Emily, my dear," Mrs. Rose exclaimed as she opened the door. What a joy to see you! Come in, come in. The inside of the house was simple but cozy, with well-preserved antique furniture and family photographs scattered across the walls. Mrs. Rose served coffee and homemade cookies, while Emily explained her situation. "So Richard Thompson's son is being auctioned off like cattle at the market," Mrs. Rose remarked with a laugh. "That man has always been eccentric, but this time he's outdone himself." "Mrs. Rose, do you think I should participate?" The elderly woman grew thoughtful for a moment, stirring her coffee slowly. "Emily, tell me something. Do you really like this young man, or are you interested in the social position he represents?" "I truly like him, Mrs. Rose. I've liked him for a long time, long before I knew he might have any interest in me." "And what does your heart say about joining this competition?" "My heart says it's the only chance I'll have to truly be close to him. But my head says it's a humiliating situation and I'll probably end up hurt." Mrs. Rose stood up and walked to the window overlooking the backyard garden. "Sweetheart, do you see that rose bush there in the left corner?" Emily looked and saw a rose bush that produced deep red, fragrant flowers. "Yes, I see it. That rose bush was nearly dead when I planted it here 15 years ago. It was just a dried-up branch my neighbor was going to throw away. Everyone told me I was wasting my time, that it would never amount to anything. Today, it's the most beautiful one in the garden." "What are you trying to say?" "Sometimes, the most beautiful things in life begin under circumstances that seem impossible. If you truly love this young man, and if he's shown genuine interest in you, maybe it's worth facing the competition, no matter how strange it is." "But how? Can I compete with women who have far more resources?" Mrs. Rose returned to the table and took Emily's hands. "Dear, you grew up among flowers. You have a natural gift that money can't buy. And more importantly, you have something those other women might not. True love. That makes all the difference. And if it's not enough, then at least you'll know you tried. It's better to try and fail than to spend the rest of your life wondering what if." Mrs. Rose's words echoed in Emily's mind all afternoon. By nightfall, she had finally made her decision. On Wednesday morning, Emily went to the Thompson mansion to formally register for the competition. The imposing gate and grand entrance had always intimidated her, but this time she was determined not to be affected by the display of wealth. The maid who answered the door recognized her and led her to an office where Richard was receiving the applicants. When Emily entered, he was finishing up with another young woman she didn't know. "Emily Parker," Richard said when they were alone. "I must admit, I'm surprised. I didn't expect you'd be interested in participating." "Why not?" Emily asked, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Well, you always seemed like a very practical young woman. I thought you'd consider this competition too frivolous for your taste." Emily noticed the condescension in his tone, but kept her composure. "Mr. Richard, I've worked with flowers for over 15 years. If this competition is about knowledge and skill with plants, I believe I have as good a chance as any other candidate." Richard studied her for a moment as if seeing her in a new light. "Interesting. And tell me, Emily, what motivates you to want to marry my son?" The direct question caught her off guard, but she decided to be honest. "I don't want to marry your son, Mr. Richard. I want the chance to get to know him better and see if we can build something real together. Marriage would come naturally if there's mutual love, not as the main goal." Richard seemed intrigued by her answer. "Very well. You're officially registered. The rules are all explained in this document. The first round is in 2 weeks. Good luck." When Emily left the mansion, she felt a mix of relief and apprehension. She was officially committed to the competition, for better or worse. For the rest of the week, Emily threw herself into planning her strategy for the first round. She needed to grow a flower that was not only beautiful but meaningful, one that showcased her unique skills. After much thought, she decided to cultivate a hybrid rose her father had developed years before his passing. It was a unique variety that combined the hardiness of a wild rose with the delicate beauty of a garden rose. The flowers were a soft, pink with slightly reddish edges, and their fragrance was rich and sweet. Her father had named the variety Hope Rose, but he'd never officially registered or marketed it. Emily knew she had only 2 weeks to make the rose bloom at exactly the right time for the presentation. It was a considerable technical challenge, but she knew the plant's behavior well and was confident she could do it. Meanwhile, she kept an eye on the other candidates. Victoria had indeed hired a team of professional gardeners and was cultivating rare orchids in a greenhouse she'd built in her backyard. Olivia was working with exotic flower seedlings she'd imported especially for the competition. Rachel, who had finally decided to participate, chose to grow sunflowers, explaining that they represented her optimistic, light-seeking personality. Besides these four, 6 more women had signed up, bringing the total to 10 candidates. Emily didn't know the others well, but through town gossip, she'd heard some had interesting backgrounds. One was a chef specializing in edible flowers, another was a biology teacher with a master's in botany, and there was even an artist who worked with floral installations. The variety of profiles made the competition even more unpredictable. Clearly, each would bring a different approach to the challenges. During the first week of cultivation, Emily faced her first serious obstacle. The Hope Rose seedlings, which she'd prepared with such care, began showing signs of a fungal disease. The leaves developed dark spots and some started yellowing prematurely. Emily was desperate. She knew if she lost these seedlings, she wouldn't have enough time to start over and still have mature flowers ready for the presentation. She worked through the night, applying natural treatments she'd learned from her father, adjusting humidity, light, and ventilation in the small space she'd improvised as a greenhouse behind her shop. "Emily, you need to rest," said Mrs. Grace on Thursday night, finding her daughter still tending to the plants at 2 in the morning. "It won't do any good if you get sick too." "Mom, if I lose these seedlings, I'll lose the competition before it even starts," replied Emily, carefully applying a natural fungicide to the affected leaves. "And if you keep going without sleep, you'll lose the ability to care for them properly," her mother insisted. "Go to bed. The plants will still be here in the morning." Reluctantly, Emily obeyed, but she slept only 3 hours before waking up worried and rushing to check on the seedlings. To her relief, the treatment had worked. The spots had stopped spreading, and the plants seemed to be responding well. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. During the second week, Emily received an unexpected visit. Brandon showed up at the shop on a Friday afternoon, looking even more worried than the first time. "Emily, I need to tell you something," he said as soon as they stepped into the private area of the shop. "My father is planning something to influence the competition's outcome." "What do you mean?" "He doesn't want you to win. In fact, he already has a preferred candidate in mind, and it's not you." Emily's stomach twisted. "Who is it?" "Victoria Prescott. Her father is my dad's business partner, and they've been talking about uniting the families for a while. Now this whole competition is just a show to legitimize a decision my father's already made." The revelation hit Emily like a punch to the gut. She steadied herself against the counter to keep from swaying. "Then why are you telling me this? Why even participate in a competition that's already decided?" "Because I won't let it happen," Brandon said firmly, "and because, even if my father prefers Victoria, the other judges might have different opinions." "Other judges?" "Yes. My father isn't judging alone. He invited 3 others, Mrs. Margaret, who's president of the Gardeners Association, Professor Edward, who teaches botany at the university, and Mrs. Elizabeth, who's organized the municipal garden contest for 15 years. This information completely changed Emily's perspective on the competition. If Richard were the only judge, she'd truly have no chance. But with 3 other professionals evaluating the work, maybe there was hope. "Brandon, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "If you could choose freely, no pressure from your father, no competition, none of that, who would you choose?" Brandon looked into her eyes for a long moment before answering. "You, Emily. I'd choose you." Her heart raced, but she needed more clarity. "Why?" "Because you're real. You're genuine, hard-working, kind. You're not interested in my money or social status. You care about the people around you. And when I talk to you, I feel like I can be myself. No acting required." His words touched her deeply, but also made her even more determined to fight for this chance. "Then I'll give it my all in this competition, no matter what your father's planning." Emily, there's one more thing you should know. My father will try to sabotage your work somehow. He's already told me he thinks you don't have enough class for the family. Keep an eye out for anything strange. Brandon's warning proved prophetic. On Monday of the presentation week, Emily arrived at the shop to find that someone had broken into her makeshift greenhouse overnight. Several seedlings were damaged, and the irrigation system had been sabotaged, leaving some plants waterlogged and others completely dry. Emily stood in shock as she looked at the destruction. Months of careful work had been ruined in a single night. Her most beautiful roses were destroyed, and there were only 5 days left until the presentation. "Mom!" she shouted, calling for Mrs. Grace. When her mother saw the damage, her reaction was one of complete outrage. "Who would do something so cruel?" she asked, examining the wreckage. "I think I know who," Emily replied bitterly, "or at least I know who might have ordered it." "What will you do now?" Emily looked at the few surviving seedlings. There were 3 roses of her father's variety that were damaged but still alive, along with some other plants in poor condition. "I'll work with what's left. I won't give up now." For the next 5 days, Emily barely left the shop. She worked day and night to save the remaining plants, using every technique she knew to speed up recovery and encourage blooming. Mrs. Grace helped as much as she could, bringing food and tending to the shop, while Emily focused on rescuing the seedlings. Mrs. Rose also came to assist, bringing some of her homemade fertilizers and offering advice based on decades of experience. "Emily, this rose here could still produce a beautiful flower," Mrs. Rose said, examining one of the less damaged seedlings. "Look, there's a bud forming here. If you take good care of it, you might get it to bloom in time." It was a fragile hope, but Emily clung to it with all her determination. On the eve of the presentation, Emily had managed to save only 1 rose. It was an imperfect flower, with some petals slightly marked by the damage, but still beautiful and fragrant. Most importantly, it was a unique variety, one none of the other contestants could present. The presentation took place in the Thompson Mansion garden on a Saturday afternoon. Emily arrived carefully carrying her pot with the single rose, feeling nervous but determined. The other contestants were already there, each with their own creations. Victoria had brought a rare orchid with exotic coloring, displayed in an oriental porcelain vase that probably cost more than Emily made in a year. Olivia presented a flower she had created through grafting, combining traits from 3 different species into one spectacular plant. Rachel brought perfect sunflowers, arranged to form a miniature golden field. The other contestants had also outdone themselves. The chef had edible flowers arranged like a gourmet dish. The biology teacher presented an orchid she had coaxed to bloom out of season. The artist created an installation with flowers of various colors, arranged into striking geometric patterns. Emily looked at her single rose and for a moment felt completely inadequate. Her presentation seemed simple and modest compared to the extravagance of the others. The 4 judges, Richard, Mrs. Margaret, Professor Edward and Mrs. Elizabeth, began evaluating each entry. Richard clearly favored Victoria, praising the rarity and value of her orchid. But Emily noticed the other 3 judges had different reactions. Mrs. Margaret, a white-haired woman who had dedicated her life to plant cultivation, examined each presentation with technical precision. Professor Edward asked detailed questions about growing techniques. Mrs. Elizabeth evaluated not just the beauty of the flowers, but also the creativity and originality of each display. When it was Emily's turn, her legs trembled. Richard looked at her with an expression that mixed condescension and impatience. "Well, Emily, let's see what you've prepared for us," he said, in a tone that made his low expectations clear. Emily took a deep breath and began her presentation. "This is a hope rose," she said, carefully holding the pot. "It's a unique variety my father developed many years ago but never marketed. It combines the hardiness of a wild rose with the delicacy of a cultivated garden rose." Professor Edward stepped closer, intrigued. "Was your father a botanist?" "Not formally, but he had an intuitive knowledge of plants that was extraordinary. He spent years experimenting with hybridization until he achieved this variety." "And you managed to replicate his work?" asked Mrs. Margaret, examining the flower closely. Yes, this rose is disease-resistant, blooms nearly year-round, and has a unique fragrance blending sweet and citrus notes. Mrs. Elizabeth gently touched one of the petals. The color is magnificent. This shade of pink with reddish edges is very rare. The most important thing, Emily continued, gaining confidence, is that this rose represents everything I believe about love and relationships. It's strong enough to survive hardships, but delicate enough to remain beautiful. It doesn't bloom just for a moment, but continuously, as long as it's well cared for. Richard made an impatient face, but the other three judges seemed genuinely interested. Emily, said Professor Edward, could you tell us more about the techniques your father used to develop this hybrid? Emily spent the next 10 minutes explaining in detail the process she had observed as a child and recreated in recent years. She talked about cross-pollination, trait selection, and the patience required to develop a stable new variety. When she finished, she realized she had earned the respectful attention of 3 out of the 4 judges. Richard remained clearly unimpressed, but Mrs. Margaret, Professor Edward, and Mrs. Elizabeth were taking notes and discussing quietly among themselves. After all the candidates had presented, the judges withdrew to deliberate. Emily stayed in the garden with the others, feeling a mix of nerves and relief that she had managed to present properly despite all the difficulties. Victoria approached, her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Emily, dear, what an interesting flower you brought. It's a shame it's so simple, especially after the trouble you had in your greenhouse this week. The comment confirmed Emily's suspicions about who was responsible for the sabotage. How did you know about the problems in my greenhouse? Emily asked directly. Oh, news travels fast in a small town like ours, Victoria replied with false innocence. But don't worry, I'm sure you did the best you could with what was left. Olivia, who had overheard the conversation, stepped closer. Victoria, I hope you know that interfering with another candidate's work could be grounds for disqualification, she said calmly. I don't know what you're talking about, Victoria replied, though her expression grew less confident. Rachel joined the group. Ladies, don't you think this whole competition is getting a little toxic? She asked. At the end of the day, we're competing for a person, not a prize. Says the woman who decided to join despite thinking the whole situation was absurd, Olivia remarked dryly. That's true, I changed my mind, but only because I realized it might be the only way to get to know Brandon better. He's too shy for conventional approaches. Emily was surprised by Rachel's confession. She hadn't known the teacher also had a genuine interest in Brandon. Rachel, can I ask you something? Said Emily. Do you really like Brandon, or are you more interested in the unusual situation? A bit of both, to be honest. I've always found him interesting, but we've never had the chance to talk alone. This competition, as strange as it is, created a situation where I can show him who I really am, in a way he wouldn't have seen otherwise. The conversation was interrupted when the judges returned. Richard carried a sealed envelope with the results. Contestants, he said, adopting a formal tone. The evaluation for the first round was based on originality, cultivation technique, presentation beauty, and personal meaning behind your choice. Emily felt her heart race. This was the moment of truth. After careful deliberation, the judges have determined that 3 contestants stood out significantly and will advance to the next round. Emily held her breath. The selected contestants are Victoria Prescott for technical excellence and the rarity of her presentation, Olivia Bennett for demonstrated innovation and creativity, and Emily Parker for originality and deep knowledge displayed. Emily could hardly believe what she'd heard. She had made it to the next round. Despite all the sabotage, despite having only one imperfect flower to present, she had earned the judges' respect. Victoria looked pleased, but unsurprised as, if she'd expected to advance, Olivia smiled with professional approval. The other contestants congratulated the winners politely, but Emily could see the disappointment on their faces. Rachel approached Emily after the announcement. Congratulations, Emily. Your presentation was truly impressive. You deserve to move forward. Thank you, Rachel. I'm sorry you didn't make it. Don't worry. Honestly, I think this experience made me realize this might not be the right path for me. I'd rather get to know people in a more traditional way. When the ceremony ended, Brandon walked over to Emily as she carefully placed her rose back in its vase. "Congratulations," he said with a genuine smile. "Your presentation was exceptional." "Thank you. Honestly, I didn't expect to advance after everything that happened this week." "Emily, about the sabotage, I'm really sorry. I tried to find out who did it, but I couldn't get solid proof. Don't worry. What matters is I saved one flower and gave a good presentation." "You're amazing," Brandon said, lightly touching her arm. "I don't know anyone else who'd have the determination and skill to overcome something like that." The compliment made her blush, but it also strengthened her resolve to keep fighting in the next rounds. Richard approached his son and Emily, clearly displeased with her presence in the conversation. "Brandon, could you help me carry a few things inside?" he said, clearly trying to cut their talk short. "Of course, Dad. Emily, see you in the next round." After they walked away, Olivia approached Emily. "Congratulations on advancing. You did impressive work, especially considering the adverse circumstances." "Thank you, Olivia." "Emily, my offer to team up still stands. In fact, now that we've come this far, I think it would be even more beneficial for both of us." Emily hesitated. The idea of an alliance was tempting, especially knowing Victoria would likely keep using questionable methods, but something about the proposal still bothered her. "Olivia, can I ask you something directly?" "Of course. If you win the competition, do you really intend to marry Brandon?" Olivia thought for a moment before answering. "Honestly, I don't know. It would depend on whether we develop a real connection during the process. But I must admit my main motivation is professional, not romantic." "And don't you think that's unfair to him?" "Emily, I'll be honest with you. This whole competition has been absurd from the start. None of us should be here competing for a husband as if he were a raffle prize. But since we're here, each of us has our own reasons. Yours is love, mine is business, and Victoria's is social status. None is more valid than the other." Olivia's honesty was refreshing, but it also made Emily think about the ethical implications of the whole situation. "You have a point," Emily admitted. "But even so, I'd rather compete on my own. It feels more authentic." "I understand. But know my offer stands if you change your mind." When Emily got home that night, she found Mrs. Grace waiting anxiously in the living room. "So, dear, how did it go?" "I passed, Mom. I made it to the second round." Mrs. Grace hugged her daughter with pride and relief. "I knew you could do it. Tell me everything." Emily recounted every detail of the afternoon, from the other candidates' presentations to her own performance and the final result. When she mentioned her suspicion about the sabotage, Mrs. Grace was outraged. "That girl has no integrity. How could she do such a thing?" "Mom, we don't have proof. And even if we did, exposing it now would only create more drama. I'd rather focus on the next round." "And what is the next round?" Emily checked the rules she'd been given. "A floral arrangement that represents my personality. I have 3 weeks to create something and present it to the judges." 3 weeks isn't much time for something so important," Mrs. Grace noted. "I know, but at least now I know what kind of sabotage to expect. I'll be more careful with security." Over the next week, Emily devoted herself to planning her arrangement for the second round. She wanted to create something not only visually stunning, but also telling a story about who she was as a person. After much thought, she decided on an arrangement representing her journey from childhood to the present. It would have 3 sections, one symbolizing her humble roots with simple yet resilient flowers, another showing her growth and learning with flowers requiring more care and skill, and a third representing her future aspirations with rare and delicate blooms. The idea was ambitious and would require a wide variety of flowers, some of which she'd have to grow specifically for the arrangement. But she was determined to create something unique and personal. During the first few days of work, Emily noticed she was being watched. A middle-aged man she didn't recognize passed by the shop several times a day, always peering inside with excessive interest. By Thursday, she decided to confront him. When he walked by again, Emily stepped outside and approached him directly. "Can I help you with something?" she asked politely. The man seemed embarrassed at being caught. "Oh no, thank you. I was just admiring the flowers in the window." You've been passing by several times a day for 3 days straight. Are you sure there's nothing specific you need? The man hesitated, clearly debating whether to be honest. Actually, I was hired to observe your shop, he finally admitted. Hired by whom? I can't say. But I can tell you I'm not here to cause trouble, just to observe and report. Emily felt a chill in her stomach. Someone was spying on her work for the competition's second round. What exactly are you reporting? What kind of flowers you're buying? What techniques you're using when you come and go, things like that. The confirmation made it clear Emily needed to be even more cautious. Clearly, her competitors in the contest weren't going to make things easy. Can I ask you a favor? Emily said to the man. Depends on what it is. If you have to report anything, could you at least give false information? Say I'm working with different types of flowers than the ones I'm actually using? The man smiled for the first time. Miss, I like you, you've got guts, but I can't do that. I need the money they're paying me. I understand, but thank you for your honesty. After that encounter, Emily took steps to protect her work. She began cultivating some decoy flowers, seedlings that were actually the species she intended to use, but presented to observers as different varieties. She also started doing part of her real work at Mrs. Rose's house, who offered her backyard garden as a more private location. The strategy worked. For the next 2 weeks, Emily managed to work on her real arrangement undisturbed while maintaining a fake operation at the shop to throw off the spies. The arrangement she was creating was turning out even more beautiful than she had imagined. The roots section included simple daisies, dandelions transformed into something decorative, and small wild roses. The growth section featured lilies, tulips, and some orchids she had successfully cultivated. The aspirations section would be crowned with rare hybrid roses and some flowers she had grafted, using techniques she learned from watching Olivia in the first round. 3 days before the second round presentation, Emily received an unexpected visit from Brandon. He arrived at the shop late in the afternoon as she was closing. Emily, I need to warn you about something, he said, looking worried. What is it? My father found out where you're really working on your arrangement. He knows about Mrs. Rose's garden. Emily's heart raced. How did he find out? I'm not sure, but I suspect someone followed you. Victoria casually mentioned during dinner last night that she heard you were expanding your operations. What does this mean for me? It means you need to move your work to a safe place immediately, Emily thought quickly. There were only 3 days left, and her arrangement was at a very delicate stage. Moving the plants now could ruin everything. Brandon, do you have any idea where I could work safely? He hesitated for a moment. Actually, I do, but you might find the suggestion strange. I'm willing to hear anything. There's an abandoned greenhouse on my grandparents' property, about 15 kilometers from here. No one's been there in years, but the structure is still intact. You could work there undisturbed. The offer was tempting, but Emily hesitated. Brandon, wouldn't that be inappropriate? I mean, you helping me directly in the competition? Technically, I'd just be offering a workspace. I wouldn't be helping with the arrangement itself. Emily considered her options. She could try to better secure Mrs. Rose's garden, but if the saboteurs already knew where she was working, they'd likely find a way in. All right, she decided. I'll accept your offer, but on one condition. You can't see the arrangement until the official presentation. I want it to be a surprise for you too. Deal. That same night, Emily and Mrs. Rose carefully transported all the plants and materials to the abandoned greenhouse. Brandon helped with the move, but respected their agreement not to look directly at Emily's work. His grandparents' greenhouse was a magical place. The iron and glass structure had been built decades earlier, and though it needed minor repairs, it still provided the perfect environment for delicate plants. Emily was delighted with the space and immediately felt inspired to make some adjustments to her arrangement to better utilize the natural light filtering through the antique glass. Over the next 2 days, Emily worked feverishly to complete her floral piece. She barely left the greenhouse, sleeping on an improvised mattress Brandon had brought for her. Mrs. Grace brought food and clean clothes, while Mrs. Rose came by to offer technical advice. On the morning of the presentation, Emily finally finished her work. The arrangement stood over 3 feet tall and nearly 6 feet wide, arranged on a 3-tiered structure that told the story of her life through flowers. It was complex, colorful, fragrant, and deeply personal. "Emily, this is extraordinary," said Mrs. Rose, admiring the final result. "I've never seen anything like it." "Do you think it will impress the judges?" "My dear, if they have eyes and a heart, they'll be moved by this." Transporting the arrangement to the Thompson mansion was a delicate operation that required a borrowed truck and great care. Emily was nervous the entire trip, constantly checking to ensure no flowers had shifted or been damaged. When they arrived at the mansion, Emily saw that Victoria and Olivia were already there with their displays. Victoria's arrangement was clearly expensive and professional, featuring imported flowers arranged in an elegant but conventional design. Olivia's work was technically impressive, using advanced floral techniques to create complex geometric shapes. Emily began doubting herself again. Her arrangement was beautiful and personal, but perhaps too simple compared to the sophisticated creations of the other contestants. Brandon approached as she was setting up her display. "Emily, can I see it now?" "Yes," she replied nervously. Brandon walked around the arrangement, examining every detail. His expression gradually shifted from curiosity to admiration, and then to something Emily couldn't quite identify. "Emily, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he finally said. "You've managed to tell an entire story through flowers. It's like a visual autobiography." The compliment reassured her somewhat, but she was still nervous about the official judges' reaction. The same 4 judges from the first round, Richard, Mrs. Margaret, Professor Edward, and Mrs. Elizabeth, arrived to evaluate the presentations. This time, each contestant would have 15 minutes to explain their arrangement and answer questions. Victoria went first. Her arrangement, as Emily had observed, was technically flawless and visually striking. She explained that she had chosen flowers representing elegance, sophistication, and tradition, values she considered important for an established family like the Thompsons. Her presentation was polished and professional, but Emily felt it lacked soul. Olivia presented next. Her arrangement was a stunning demonstration of technique and innovation, using modern design principles to create forms that resembled sculptures. She explained that her personality was structured, creative, and forward-thinking, and that the arrangement reflected her methodical approach to life and work. Finally, it was Emily's turn. She took a deep breath and began. "This arrangement tells the story of my life through flowers," she said, starting with the lower section. "These simple flowers represent my humble beginnings. Daisies, because my father always said I was simple yet beautiful like a daisy. Dandelions, because I learned early on that even plants others consider weeds have their own beauty and worth." She moved to the middle section of the arrangement. "This part represents my growth and learning. Lilies, because they bloomed at the same time I began taking a serious interest in botany. Tulips, because I learned to grow them during a difficult period in my life, and they taught me patience and perseverance." Finally, she pointed to the upper section, "And this part represents my future aspirations and dreams. These hybrid roses I created symbolize my hope of contributing something unique and beautiful to the world. And these grafted flowers represent my belief that the best things in life come when different elements unite in harmony." When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Mrs. Margaret had tears in her eyes. Professor Edward was scribbling notes furiously. Mrs. Elizabeth smiled approvingly. Even Richard seemed more interested than he had been during the first presentation. "Emily," said Professor Edward, "could you elaborate on the techniques you used to create these hybridizations in the upper section?" Emily spent the next 10 minutes answering detailed technical questions about her work. She realized she had earned the judges' respect, not just for the beauty of her arrangement, but also for the knowledge and skill she demonstrated. After all the presentations concluded, the judges withdrew once more to deliberate. Emily stayed in the garden with the other contestants, feeling more confident than in the first round, but still nervous about the outcome. "Emily, your presentation was truly moving," said Olivia. "You managed to be personal without being overly sentimental. That's a difficult balance." "Thank you, Olivia. Your arrangement was technically impressive. I'd never seen some of those grafting techniques before." Victoria remained silent, but Emily could tell she was less confident than in the first round. Her presentation had been good, but perhaps not as impactful as she'd hoped. When the judges returned, Richard once again carried the envelope with the results. "Contestants," he said, "the second round was judged based on creativity, technique, originality, and the ability to convey personality through floral arrangement." Emily held her breath. After particularly difficult deliberations, the judges have determined that 2 contestants stood out enough to advance to the final round of the competition. 2? Emily had expected 3 to move forward, as in the first round. The finalists are Victoria Prescott for the elegance and technical perfection of her presentation, and Emily Parker for the originality, creativity, and emotional depth she demonstrated. Emily could hardly believe it. She had made it to the finals, but she was also surprised Olivia hadn't advanced. Olivia approached Emily after the announcement. "Congratulations, Emily. You deserve to be in the finals. Your presentation was exceptional." "Olivia, I'm so sorry you didn't make it. Your work was incredible." "Don't worry. To be honest, I think the judges sensed my heart wasn't truly in the competition. They were looking for passion, and yours was evident." "What will you do now?" "I'll focus on my business. And who knows, maybe we can work together in the future, regardless of the final outcome." The idea pleased Emily. She had developed genuine respect for Olivia during the competition. Richard announced that the final round would take place in 2 weeks. The challenge would be to create a miniature garden symbolizing how the contestant envisions the future of the Thompson family. Each finalist would have a 3-meter by 3-meter space to work with, and the project had to include live plants, landscape design elements, and a 20-minute oral presentation. Emily knew this would be the most challenging round yet. She would need to not only demonstrate her technical skills, but also show her vision for the future and her understanding of the Thompson family. That night, after returning home, Emily had a long conversation with her mother about the situation. "Mom, I didn't expect to get this far," she admitted. "Now that I'm in the finals, I'm starting to get really nervous." "Why nervous, dear?" "Because now it's real. If I win, I'll actually marry Brandon. If I lose, I'll lose the only chance I might ever have to be with the person I love." Mrs. Grace held her daughter's hands. "Emily, you've already won something very important." "What?" "You've proven you can compete at the same level as women who have far more resources than you. You've shown that talent and dedication can overcome privilege and money. And you've discovered that Brandon truly cares for you. No matter what happens in the finals, you've already gained precious things." Her mother's words comforted her, but Emily knew she still had a lot of work ahead. During the first week of preparation for the finals, Emily dedicated herself to researching the Thompson family. She visited the town library, spoke with older people who knew the family's history, and even managed to access some old newspaper articles that discussed the company and its activities in the community. What she discovered helped her better understand Richard and his expectations. The Thompson family had arrived in town 3 generations earlier, when Brandon's great-grandfather established a small building materials business. Over the years, the company had grown and become one of the region's main employers, but it had always maintained a commitment to the local community. Richard had inherited the business from his father and expanded it significantly, though always within regional limits. He was known for being a fair but demanding employer and for generously contributing to local causes. However, he also had a reputation for being conservative and traditional in his views on family and society. Based on this information, Emily began planning her miniature garden. She wanted to create something that honored the family's traditions, but also suggested growth and renewal. The idea forming in her mind was a garden that represented continuity and change in harmony. During her planning, Emily received an unexpected visit from Rachel, the teacher who had participated in the first round. "Emily, can I talk to you?" Rachel asked hesitantly. "Of course, Rachel, come in." I wanted to tell you something that might be important for the finals." Emily was intrigued. "What is it?" "Last night I was having dinner at the downtown restaurant when I saw Victoria talking to a man I didn't recognize. They were discussing the competition finals, and I overheard some things that worried me." "What kind of things?" "The man seemed to be some kind of landscaping consultant or expert. Victoria was paying him to design her entire garden for the finals. She won't even touch the project. He's doing everything, and she'll just present it." The news didn't completely surprise Emily, but it confirmed her suspicions about Victoria's methods. "Rachel, why are you telling me this?" "Because it's not fair. You've worked hard and honestly in every round while she's basically buying her victory, and also because, well, because I'm rooting for you." "Thank you, Rachel. But what can I do with this information?" "I don't know, maybe nothing. Maybe, but I thought you should know what you're up against." After Rachel left, Emily kept thinking about the situation. She could report Victoria to the judges, but she had no concrete proof beyond Rachel's second-hand account. Moreover, making an accusation without solid evidence could come across as an act of desperation. Emily decided to focus on doing the best job possible with her own resources. If Victoria was cheating, the experienced judges would likely notice the difference between authentic work and a professional project presented by an amateur. During the second week of preparation, Emily worked intensively on creating her miniature garden. She had gotten permission to use Brandon's grandparents' greenhouse again, and this time he didn't have to avoid looking at her work, since the presentation would be public anyway. The garden Emily was creating was a symbolic representation of the Thompson family's history and future. At the center, she planted a young but sturdy tree, representing the family's solid roots. Around the tree, she created 3 concentric sections. The innermost section represented the past with traditional hardy plants, symbolizing the strong foundation laid by previous generations. The middle section represented the present, with a mix of established plants and new varieties, symbolizing the transition between tradition and modernity. The outermost section represented the future, with young plants and innovative hybrids, symbolizing growth and adaptation. Emily also included landscape design elements, small stone pathways connecting the different sections, a miniature fountain symbolizing the continuity of life, and small structures representing different aspects of the family business. The project was ambitious and required careful coordination to ensure all the plants bloomed at just the right time for the presentation. Emily spent entire nights adjusting the light, water, and nutrients to achieve perfect timing. Brandon visited the greenhouse daily, always bringing food or offering practical help. Emily appreciated his presence and support, and they grew closer during these weeks of intense work. "Emily," Brandon said one afternoon, 3 days before the final, "Can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "If you don't win the competition, will that change anything between us?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, would you still be willing to keep getting to know me, even if it's not through this absurd situation my father created?" Emily stopped watering the plants and looked directly at him. "Brandon, I'd really like to keep getting to know you better, no matter the outcome of the competition. But if you're forced to marry whoever wins..." "I won't be forced," he said firmly. "I've already made that clear to my father. I might lose my position in the company, but I won't marry someone I didn't choose for love." The statement moved Emily deeply. "And if you lose your position in the company, then I'll find another way to support myself. Maybe start my own business, maybe work for another company. The important thing is, I won't let my father dictate my personal life. That would be very hard for you, considering you grew up expecting to inherit the family business." "It would be hard, yes, but less hard than living a life I didn't choose." The conversation was interrupted when Mrs. Grace arrived with dinner for both of them. She'd gotten used to bringing food to the greenhouse over the past few weeks, and Emily cherished these family moments. "How's the garden coming along, dear?" Mrs. Grace asked, admiring the progress. "It's almost ready, Mom. Just a few final touches left." "And you, Brandon, what do you think of Emily's work?" "I think it's extraordinary, Mrs. Grace. She's managed to create something that's both beautiful and deeply meaningful. My daughter has always had a talent for this, Mrs. Grace said proudly. Since she was little, she saw things in plants that other people couldn't. After dinner, while Mrs. Grace walked back home, Brandon and Emily stayed in the greenhouse talking about various topics. She discovered he had interests and dreams far beyond the family business, and he was impressed by the depth of her knowledge about botany and design. "Emily," he said as it grew late, "can I tell you something?" "Of course." "No matter what happens in the final, these last few weeks have been the best of my life. I've never felt so connected to someone." His words made Emily's heart race. "I feel the same way," she admitted. They fell silent for a moment, gazing at each other in the soft glow of the greenhouse. Emily sensed this was a pivotal moment, a turning point in their relationship. "Brandon," she finally said, "no matter what happens in the final, I want you to know that entering this competition was worth it just for the chance to get to know each other better." "For me too," he replied, gently touching her face. It was the first time they shared a truly intimate moment, and Emily felt all the weeks of effort and anxiety had led to this perfect instant. The day before the final, Emily made the last adjustments to her miniature garden. Everything was perfect. The plants had bloomed right on time. The design elements were harmoniously integrated, and she had memorized her oral presentation. Victoria arrived at the Thompson mansion with a team of professionals to set up her garden. Emily watched from a distance as uniformed men unloaded expensive plants and elaborate decorative pieces. Victoria's design was clearly visually stunning, but Emily wondered if it had the soul and authenticity the judges seemed to value. Olivia showed up to wish the finalists good luck, though she had been eliminated in the previous round. "Emily, I came to cheer for you," she said. "I know you'll give an amazing presentation." "Thank you, Olivia. Your support means so much." "And Victoria," Olivia added, turning to the other finalist, "good luck to you too. May the best win." Victoria merely nodded politely, clearly focused on overseeing her garden's setup. That night, Emily barely slept. She mentally rehearsed her presentation dozens of times, worrying over every detail. Mrs. Grace stayed up with her, offering tea and words of encouragement. "Sweetheart, you've already done your part. Now it's just a matter of presenting what you've created well." "Mum, what if it's not enough? What if the judges prefer Victoria's project?" "Then you'll know you did your best with what you had, and that's all anyone can do." Her mother's words soothed her a little, but Emily was still too nervous to sleep properly. On the morning of the final, Emily arrived early at the mansion for last-minute preparations. Her miniature garden had been carefully transported overnight and set up in its designated spot. She spent an hour tweaking minor details and ensuring everything was flawless. Victoria's garden was assembled beside hers, and Emily had to admit it was visually striking. Clearly a professional project with sophisticated elements and expensive plants arranged in technically perfect order. Yet Emily noticed something. Personal or unique was missing from the design. It looked more like a magazine-perfect decor piece than an authentic expression of someone's personality. The judges arrived at 10 o'clock. Richard, Mrs. Margaret, Professor Edward, and Mrs. Elizabeth. This time they would be accompanied by an audience of guests, including family and friends of the finalists, members of the local community, and some important people from the town. Emily saw that Brandon was among the guests, along with Mrs. Grace, Mrs. Rose, and several others who had followed her journey throughout the competition. Their presence reassured her, while also adding to the pressure she felt. Richard gave a brief introduction, explaining the judging criteria for the final round: creativity, technical knowledge, relevance to the Thompson family, and the quality of the oral presentation. Victoria went first. Her garden was truly spectacular, from a visual standpoint, with an impressive variety of exotic plants arranged in complex geometric patterns. Her presentation was polished and well-rehearsed, focusing on the values of excellence, tradition, and prosperity that she associated with the Thompson family. However, Emily noticed that Victoria struggled to answer some technical questions from the judges about the plants and techniques used. It was clear she hadn't been directly involved in creating the garden. Professor Edward asked a particularly challenging question about the compatibility of some chosen plants with the local climate, and Victoria gave a vague answer that revealed her lack of practical knowledge. Mrs. Margaret inquired about the symbolism behind certain plant choices, and again Victoria gave rehearsed but generic responses that didn't feel genuine. When it was Emily's turn, she felt a strange calm wash over her. All the weeks of preparation, all the stress and nerves, suddenly gave way to a serene confidence. "This garden tells the story of the Thompson family," she began, "but it also imagines their future." She guided the judges through the 3 concentric sections, explaining the symbolism behind each plant choice and design element. She spoke about how the deep roots of the past could nourish future growth, how tradition and innovation could coexist harmoniously, and how a family could stay true to its core values while adapting to a changing world. "This tree at the center," she said, gently touching the young trunk, "represents continuity. It will grow over the years, becoming stronger and more beautiful, but always keeping its roots in the same place." Professor Edward asked several technical questions about the chosen plants, and Emily answered with detailed knowledge and evident passion. She explained why she had selected each species, how she had adapted some for the garden's specific microclimate, and what care would be needed to maintain the project over the years. Mrs. Margaret asked about the garden's sustainability, and Emily described how she had chosen native and adapted plants that would require fewer resources and create a balanced ecosystem. Mrs. Elizabeth questioned the symbolism and personal meaning of the garden, and Emily spoke emotionally about her vision for the Thompson family's future as a positive force in the community, honoring traditions while embracing positive change. Even Richard asked questions, and Emily could see he was genuinely interested in her answers, despite his initial reservations about her fit for the family. When she finished her presentation, there was a moment of appreciative silence. Emily could see tears in her mother's and Mrs. Rose's eyes. Brandon looked at her with an expression of admiration and love that made her feel completely fulfilled, regardless of the competition's outcome. The judges withdrew to deliberate, and Emily stayed in the garden with the guests. Several people came up to congratulate her on her presentation, and she began to feel more confident about her chances. Victoria seemed less confident than in previous stages. She had clearly noticed that her presentation hadn't been as well received as she'd hoped, especially when she couldn't adequately answer the technical questions. "Emily," Victoria said, approaching her, "regardless of the outcome, I must admit your presentation was impressive." "Thank you, Victoria. Your garden is also very beautiful." "Yes, well, I had some very good help," Victoria admitted, looking slightly embarrassed. It was the first time she had indirectly acknowledged she hadn't done the work alone. Brandon approached Emily as they awaited the results. "Emily, your presentation was extraordinary. You managed to capture the exact spirit of our family while also suggesting future possibilities I'd never considered." "Thank you, Brandon. I hope the judges see it the same way. Whatever they decide, I want you to know my decision is already made." "What do you mean?" "I mean you're the person I want to build my future with or without this competition's approval." His words touched her deeply, but before she could respond, the judges returned. Richard carried the final envelope with a solemn expression. The crowd gathered around as he prepared to make the announcement. "Contestants," he said, "this was an exceptional competition and both of you demonstrated remarkable talent. However, the judges have reached a unanimous decision." Emily held her breath one last time. "The winner of the competition, and therefore the future wife of my son Brandon, is..." The silence seemed to stretch endlessly. "Emily Parker." Emily stood in shock for a moment, barely processing what she'd heard. She had won. After months of hard work, obstacles, and sabotage, she had truly won the competition. The crowd erupted in applause. Mrs. Grace rushed to embrace her daughter, crying with joy. Mrs. Rose was also in tears, radiant with pride. Brandon approached with a huge smile and hugged her warmly. "Congratulations," he murmured in her ear. "You deserve this more than anyone." Victoria came forward to congratulate Emily, and though she seemed disappointed, she was gracious in defeat. Congratulations, Emily. You did a truly exceptional job. Thank you, Victoria. I know you worked hard too. Mrs. Margaret approached Emily with tears in her eyes. Dear, in 40 years of evaluating gardens and floral arrangements, I've never seen anything as moving as your presentation today. You not only demonstrated exceptional technical knowledge, but also created something with true soul. Professor Edward added, Emily, your understanding of botany is impressive, especially considering you're self-taught. You have a natural talent that's rare to find. Mrs. Elizabeth was equally complimentary. Your ability to tell a story through plants and design is extraordinary. You have a bright future ahead. Even Richard, who had been skeptical of Emily from the start, came forward to congratulate her. Emily, he said, I must admit you surprised me. Your knowledge, dedication and vision for our family exceeded my expectations. It will be an honor to have you as my daughter-in-law. Richard's approval meant a lot to Emily, especially given his initial resistance. The spontaneous celebration that followed was joyful. Guests gathered in the mansion's garden to celebrate, and Emily found herself at the center of attention, receiving congratulations and well wishes from people she barely knew. During the celebration, Brandon found a moment to speak with Emily privately. How are you feeling? He asked. I'm still processing everything, she admitted. Part of me can't believe I actually won. You didn't just win the competition. Emily, you won my heart, the respect of the judges and the admiration of this entire community. And now? What happens now? Now we have time to get to know each other better without the pressure of the competition. We can build a real relationship at our own pace. You don't feel pressured by the expectation of marriage? Not anymore. My father and I talked during the judge's deliberation. He understood that forcing an immediate marriage would be counterproductive. We'll have time to let our relationship develop naturally. The answer relieved one of Emily's biggest worries. She had won the competition, but she didn't want it to result in a forced or rushed marriage. Later that night, after the party ended and most of the guests had left, Emily found herself alone in the garden with Brandon. They walked among the plants that had witnessed the entire competition, talking about the events of the past few months. Emily, Brandon said, can I ask you something I've been thinking about for weeks? Of course. When you decided to enter the competition, was it mainly because of your feelings for me, or were there other motivations too? Emily thought carefully before answering. At first, it was mostly because of my feelings for you. But as the competition went on, I realized I was also competing for myself, to prove I could stand alongside women with far more resources, to show that talent and dedication can overcome privilege and money. And now, what do you want for the future? I want to keep working with plants and gardens. It's my passion. I want to use what I've learned to help others bring beauty into their lives, and I want to build a real relationship with you based on love and mutual respect. Those are goals I can fully support, Brandon said, smiling. They stood in silence for a moment, taking in the moonlit garden. Emily realized that despite all the challenges they'd faced, they had arrived at a place of genuine understanding and affection. Brandon, she finally said, thank you for trusting me through all of this. I know it wasn't easy for you to have your personal life turned into a public competition. Thank you for being part of it, despite all the difficulties. You showed me there's beauty and worth in places I never thought to look. That night, Emily returned home feeling completely transformed. She had entered the competition as a shy, uncertain florist and emerged as a confident woman who had proven her worth to herself and to others. In the weeks that followed, Emily and Brandon spent time getting to know each other in a more relaxed setting. They discovered they had much in common, both valued family, hard work, and contributing to their community. They also found that their differences complemented each other well. She brought passion and creativity. He brought stability and practical perspective. Emily continued working at her family's flower shop, now with an expanded clientele thanks to the publicity from the competition. Many in town had been impressed by her work and sought her out for gardening projects and special arrangements. Olivia kept her promise and offered Emily opportunities to collaborate on larger landscaping projects. The two discovered they worked well together, combining Olivia's technical skills with Emily's intuitive understanding of plants. Surprisingly, Victoria also reached out to Emily a few weeks after the competition. "Emily," she said, "one day appearing at the flower shop, I wanted to apologize for my behavior during the competition." "What behavior?" asked Emily, though she knew exactly what Victoria was referring to. "The sabotage, the spying, the attempts to undermine your work. It was despicable of me." Emily was surprised by Victoria's honesty. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I realized I was trying to win something that couldn't be won the way I was going about it. Brandon would never have chosen me, even if I had won the competition. He was interested in you from the start." "How do you know that?" "Because he told me. After the competition, he came to talk to me and explained that he had participated reluctantly. But during the process, he discovered you were the person he truly wanted to get to know better." The revelation deeply moved Emily. "Victoria, thank you for telling me this, and I accept your apology. There's one more thing. I'd like to hire you to redesign my home garden. I want something authentic this time, not something created by expensive designers." Emily was surprised but accepted the project. Working with Victoria turned out to be an interesting experience and helped the two develop an unexpected friendship. 6 months after the competition, Emily and Brandon announced their engagement. It wasn't a rushed decision, but the natural result of months of shared moments and mutual discovery. They had built a solid foundation of love, respect, and understanding that they both knew would last. The wedding took place a year later in a simple yet elegant ceremony held in the garden of the Thompson mansion, the same place where the competition that had brought them together had taken place. Emily wore a simple but beautiful dress that Mrs. Grace had sewn especially for the occasion and carried a bouquet made of hope roses, the variety her father had created and which she had presented in the first round of the competition. The garden was decorated with arrangements created by Emily, Olivia, and several others who had played a part in her journey. It was a celebration not just of Emily and Brandon's love, but also of the community that had formed around them. Richard gave a touching speech during the reception, admitting he had learned a lot about worth and character by observing Emily during the competition. He had started with prejudices about what would be suitable for his family, but had discovered that the most important qualities couldn't be bought or inherited. "Emily," he said, "you've taught us that true class has nothing to do with money or social status. It's about character, dedication, and the ability to create beauty in the world. We're honored to have you in our family." Mrs. Grace also gave a short speech, speaking of how proud she was to see her daughter grow into a strong, independent woman. "Emily has always had a special gift for making things grow and flourish," she said, "and now she's brought that same magic into her own life." During the celebration, Emily had the chance to thank everyone who had supported her journey. Mrs. Rose, who had offered invaluable advice in moments of doubt, Olivia, who had become a friend and business partner, Rachel, who had provided crucial information about Victoria's schemes, and so many others who had believed in her when she doubted herself. When Emily and Brandon left for their honeymoon, a simple but romantic trip to a mountain inn where they could relax and enjoy nature, they carried with them not just their love for each other, but also the confidence that they had built something real and lasting. A few years later, Emily and Brandon had built a life that perfectly blended their personalities and dreams. Brandon gradually took on more responsibilities in the family business, introducing fresh ideas about sustainability and social responsibility that even impressed Richard. Emily significantly expanded the flower shop, creating a business that offered not just plants and arrangements, but also gardening consultations and landscape design. They bought their own home with a large garden where Emily could experiment with new plant varieties and Brandon could unwind after intense workdays. The garden became a gathering place for friends and family, as well as a laboratory where Emily developed new techniques and creations. Mrs. Grace moved into a small house on the same block, maintaining her independence while staying close enough for daily visits. She continued sewing, but now as a pleasurable hobby rather than a financial necessity. Olivia and Emily built a successful business partnership, combining their talents to create unique landscaping projects for clients across the region. Their company became known for designing gardens that were both beautiful and sustainable. Even Victoria became a genuine friend after overcoming her initial competitiveness and discovering that authentic relationships brought more fulfillment than superficial achievements. 3 years after their wedding, Emily and Brandon were blessed with the birth of their first daughter, Sophie. As expected, the nursery was decorated with a floral theme, including hand-painted murals Emily had created during her pregnancy. Richard proved to be a devoted and loving grandfather, often found in Emily and Brandon's garden, telling Sophie stories about the plants and flowers around them. The little girl showed an early fascination with plants, often crawling between the flower beds and reaching for the colorful blossoms. "I think she inherited your talent," Brandon remarked one day, watching 6-month-old Sophie, who seemed mesmerized by the blooming sunflowers. "Or maybe she just appreciates beauty like any child," Emily replied, scooping up their daughter. But secretly she hoped Sophie would develop the same love for plants that had defined her own life. When Sophie turned 2, Emily discovered she was pregnant again. This time it was a boy, and they decided to name him Gabriel in honor of Emily's father. The family grew in harmony and happiness, always surrounded by the beauty of the garden that Emily continued to expand and refine. Each season brought new flowers and new discoveries, both for the plants and the people who cared for them. Brandon fully took over the family business when Richard decided to retire at 70. Under his leadership, the company not only maintained its prominent position in the community, but also became a model for sustainable business practices and social responsibility. Emily became a respected figure in the community, not just for her plant expertise, but also for her generosity and willingness to teach others. She offered free gardening workshops for low-income families and created a program to provide free seedlings and seeds to those who wanted to start their own gardens. The family's original flower shop transformed into an informal community center, where people of all ages came not just to buy plants, but to share experiences, learn new techniques, and meet like-minded friends. Mrs. Rose, now in her 80s, still visited Emily's garden regularly, offering advice rooted in decades of experience. She had become a sort of honorary grandmother to Sophie and Gabriel, teaching them the same lessons about patience and care that she had shared with Emily years before. One Sunday afternoon, 5 years after the wedding, Emily was working in the garden when Sophie, now 3 years old, approached carrying a small rose she had picked without permission. "Mommy, this flower is for you," the little girl said, offering the slightly crumpled rose. Emily accepted the flower with a smile, remembering how she had felt when she presented her first Hope Rose in the competition that had changed her life. "Thank you, sweetheart, it's beautiful. When I grow up, I'm going to make pretty gardens like you," Sophie declared with the absolute confidence of small children. "If that's what you want, I'll teach you everything I know," Emily promised. Brandon appeared carrying Gabriel, now 2 years old, who was fascinated by a butterfly that had landed on his nose. "What are you two thinking about?" he asked, walking over to them. "Just remembering how we got here," Emily replied, "and thinking about how bright the future looks." "Very bright," Brandon agreed, kissing the top of her head. They fell silent for a moment, watching the children play among the flowers as the afternoon sun cast golden patterns through the leaves. It was a perfect moment of contentment and fulfillment. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Emily and Brandon sat on the back porch, enjoying the fragrance of the roses blooming in the nighttime garden. "Emily," Brandon said, "do you ever regret entering the competition?" "Never," she answered without hesitation. "As strange as the situation was, it brought us here. And here is exactly where I want to be. Even with all the sabotage and drama, especially because of it. If it had been easy, maybe we wouldn't have appreciated the outcome as much." They sat together in comfortable silence, each lost in their own reflections about the extraordinary journey that had led them to this moment of perfect peace. "You know what still amazes me most about this whole story?" Brandon finally said. "What?" "How my father ended up being wise in a way none of us expected. He created an absurd situation, but one that allowed us to find each other in a way that might never have happened otherwise. That's true. If he had simply suggested we get to know each other better, we probably would have been too shy to follow through. Exactly. The competition forced us to interact in a deep and meaningful way. We saw the best and worst of each other before committing. Emily laughed, recalling some of the most stressful moments of the competition. I definitely saw you supporting me through the hardest times. That told me more about your character than months of conventional dating ever could. And I saw you persevering through obstacles that would have defeated most people. Your determination and dignity impressed me, more than anything. When they finally went to bed that night, Emily felt completely grateful for every event that had led to this moment. The strange and stressful competition, the obstacles and sabotage, the doubts and fears. It had all been necessary to build the solid foundation on which her current life stood. In the dark bedroom, with Brandon sleeping peacefully beside her, and the scent of roses drifting through the open window, Emily whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for all she had received. She had started as a humble florist with an impossible dream and had become a fulfilled woman with a loving family and a clear purpose in life. The garden outside would continue to grow and change with the seasons, just as her life would keep evolving in the years to come. But the foundation was set: true love, meaningful work, and the deep satisfaction of knowing she had fought for her dreams and won through her own merit. The end of the story. Now tell us what you thought of Emily and Brandon's story. Do you think the competition was fair? We'd love to hear your thoughts on how Emily overcame every obstacle. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other exciting stories.